live is John Blaxland, Professor of International Security and Intelligence Studies at the ANU's Strategic and Defence Centre. Thanks for your time. Look, these images are always powerful ones. What did you view this as? Is this the sort of thing where just cameras have happened to pick up this moment, or is this pretty deliberate imagery from the US president?
Yeah, that was, to my mind, pretty deliberate. The nuclear football is usually fairly discreetly kept. It's not usually, the carrier of it isn't usually somebody who goes ahead of the president. It's not something that you go around advertising unless you want to. And of course, there's a very important signal that President Biden is trying to share in doing so by having the officer in charge of carrying the so-called, football going out at 10 Downing Street. No question, that's clearly a message. But it's really important to keep in perspective what's going on here, because while Putin has for a long time now huffed and puffed about the use of tactical nuclear weapons, we've got a pretty clear indication that he has been getting a lot of pushback from not just NATO, but from China and others as well. So he knows that were the Russians to cross that threshold in terms of the deployment of and the use of a tactical nuclear weapon, that it would have significant and fairly catastrophic knock-on effects for Russia.
Yes, so when we read about a tactical nuclear weapon, this potential option, what would that actually look like? How large would the impact be? Where perhaps could it be targeted? And what sort of fallout could we see?
So, like tactical nuclear weapons, it's a bit of a misnomer because, when we think about the scale of a nuclear explosion, really the kinds of explosions that happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki are on the kind of upper threshold of what's now considered tactical in terms of nuclear explosions. Of course, knowing, that the megaton and nuclear weapon capability exists that, dwarf what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We know also, of course, that no one's used one since 1945. There's incredibly strong and compelling disincentives for them to be used. And we also know that there are fairly strong mechanisms and multiple checkpoints and safeguards, if you like, for the potential misuse of tactical nuclear weapons. I think there's another issue here too, though, Tom, and that's the question of what's happening at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Because there's a potential there for that to be used as a dirty bomb, and that has a potential to be of far graver consequence than any tactical nuclear weapon. Mindful that a tactical nuclear weapon it's very hard to plausibly deny its use, whereas a purported accident at the power plant, you could put down to, it was the Ukrainians who fired a missile at the facilities. It was their fault, right? And of course, there are reports, as we've heard, that the place is mined. Now, for a civil nuclear power plant, there are obligations for the governing country, the governing authorities, to protect it. So there is an argument to be made there. The Russians could argue we're protecting it from Ukrainian terrorists.
Well, they can always say there's something inadvertent about that if there's an explosion in terms of what they tried to aim. Your point around a nuclear weapon is you don't accidentally fire a nuclear weapon. The other interesting thing, reading between the lines of the response, keeping in mind that the US, President Biden's never going to say, and here's how we'll respond. That's called handing over the playbook, obviously. But a lot of the analysis suggests a nuclear response wouldn't be the first thing the US would respond with in accordance with its allies, that a large conventional weapon response would be more likely, because otherwise, if you go nuclear with nuclear, stating the obvious, you've got nuclear warfare.
Yeah, no, that's not a threshold anyone wants to cross, and there are a plethora of alternative options that can be explored that would involve ratcheting up the pressure and in response to Russia that would enable the NATO partners and the United States to maintain, if you can put it this way, the moral high ground, if you like. Certainly a nuclear response is not necessary. It would, to my mind, it's not at all likely and not very plausible, because for starters, the whole point of the nuclear technology is that it's about deterrence. And if you haven't deterred, then, well, what are you going to do? Are you trying to stop them from blowing up a tactical nuclear weapon? You can do that with other mechanisms. And there's certainly things that can be done around, the Black Sea Fleet, about supporting rapid increase of support for, greater air power, possibly even, NATO being more directly involved geographically inside Ukraine. There's a number of options.
Just quickly, John, as well, just in 30 seconds or so, given the domestic issues now for Vladimir Putin, if he would decide that a nuclear strike were his best way of holding on to power, is there anyone left in the Kremlin powerful enough to say, no, we're not taking that course of action? Do you think if it got to something that dramatic?
So he can't. There's no magic red button for him to press on his own. It requires a coordination of subordinate elements that are involved in actually turning keys and activating systems, so that you need the system to work in a trusted manner. So there's a number of potential, points at which the connection could break down, where somebody could say, "Hang on a minute, this is just over the top. This is ridiculous." So there's a huge element of doubt there as well, of course.
Just for something to help us sleep a little better at night, because we were going to the depths, weren't we? John Blaxland, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Good to be with you, Tom.